Welcome back to Count Me In, IMA's podcast about all things affecting the accounting and finance world. Cybersecurity is something that truly affects management accountants, but really all individuals and firms. So, Mitch spoke with Ray Hutchins and Mitch Tanenbaum about what cybersecurity really means and how to acquire the appropriate knowledge to be of great value to your organization. To hear why you need to understand cybersecurity, keep listening as we head over to their conversation now.
All right, so at a high level, how does cybersecurity really impact the finance department of an organization? Why does this stuff really matter?
Well, from Mitch and my perspective, of course, we're cybersecurity guys. And we're also business professionals. So we've been in business all of our life. We're a couple of boomers. We've got a lot of experience. And we know that, and we deal with a lot of companies um, uh, where all the cybersecurity, the risk questions are dealt with and delegated to many times the finance department. Finance takes control. In a lot of organizations, they haven't spent a lot of time setting up their internal authority around, well, who's going to be responsible for risk and compliance for the organization? Who's going to be responsible for cybersecurity and privacy? And so in a lot of organizations, that falls naturally right onto the finance department and specifically the CFO. I mean, that's been a problem we've dealt with in the past many times in an organization, saying, really, the CFO shouldn't be the one in charge of all of this. They definitely play a role. Of course, they're always important on it. But there's more people need to be involved in this. But that's the nature of the beast. The finance department is involved. They pay for it. They're accounting for it. And therefore, they need to understand something about it so that they can participate at an intelligent level in conversations around this risk category.
Let me add something to that. Every organization has a chief risk officer. Now, in many organizations, that person doesn't have that title, but in every organization, there is somebody is responsible for that, whether that's the CEO, the COO, or more often the CFO. If we assume that cybersecurity is a business risk that needs to be mitigated, just like every other business risk, and if we assume that the CFO is the chief risk officer, in fact, then it makes perfect sense that the CFO and the finance team needs to understand cyber risk to be able to lead the conversation. They don't need to be the experts, but they need to understand how that ties to business risk.
So these are all really great points. And I really like the idea of, grouping this together as a true business problem. It's not an IT problem. And if the CFO is going to act as this chief risk officer, as you said, really manage, the risk initiatives here, what specific type of information do you think the CFO or their finance team needs to acquire in order to effectively lead this risk mitigation and implement these cybersecurity procedures for their organization?
Good question. And it brings up something, both Mitch and I have my partner Mitch, as opposed to you, Mitch. But both Mitch and I have, of course, spoken at multiple IMA meetings at this time, and we're familiar with IMA as an organization. It's something that we find out there in the IMA organization. You've got a lot of executives in transition from one company to another, and within their moving up in their career and whatnot. And something that I have found to be the case is when I'm talking to these people out there is that, and I make the point that as a financial services professional, no matter what your rank, no matter what your position within the organization, you can make yourself much more valuable to the organization if you have a business grasp of cybersecurity and privacy and its business implications, and you can speak the language. You've got some jargon, not technical jargon, just general jargon about it, perhaps knowing some of the regulatory environment, knowing some of the regulations and the standards that affect all businesses, kind of understanding that and being able to engage on that. Companies have a terrible shortage of anybody who can talk the talk of cybersecurity and privacy. So if you can demonstrate any level of competency, any level, well, that changes your value proposition within the company.
So I would say that just like any other risk problem, you want to create a governance, risk, and compliance framework, a GRC framework. Now, the good news is the federal government, in the guise of the Department of Commerce, National Institute of Standards and Technology, has created a great governance framework, which is the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. And as of this past January, its partner, the NIST Privacy Framework. These are governance frameworks, high-level governance frameworks that every organization needs to be looking at. And I will tell you, and we do a lot of work with this, nobody is 100% when it comes to these frameworks. But the framework provides a set of guidance for organizations big and small. So if you go look at policies, for example, and it asks questions about policies, well, a small organization is going to need a different set of policies than a big organization. An organization that operates in multiple states and multiple countries might need different policies than one that doesn't. But if you all lay this into that framework, and then you can go off and say, as the chief risk officer, okay, this is a network problem, or this is an IT problem, or this is a what level of risk are we willing to assume problem, and you can go off and assign different people in the organization to go help you complete this framework and see where you stand. The first thing that I would always do, and we do a lot of these, is a gap analysis. Let's go look at where we are versus where we want to be, and we have these conversations, and we generate a list of gaps, and then it becomes a business conversation for the C-suite and for larger organizations for the board. Very importantly, the board has to provide guidance on this to say, what is a level of risk we're willing to take? And the risk could be a compliance risk, it could be a legal risk, it could be a reputation risk, it could be a whole variety of different risks that we could be taking on. But what's important for every organization is to understand the level of risk that they're taking on. Go look at Equifax as a great example, right? The whole Equifax breach started because they didn't patch a server. Now, that comes down to having an appropriate understanding of what is the level of risk of having all these servers out there, and having a patch management program that works. So that gets into the technical weeds. But you can go look at every breach that's out there, whether it's Capital One, whether it's Equifax. These are mega breaches, hundreds of millions of records in some cases. Marriott Starwood, and you can create lessons that you can learn. Let's go look at what they did wrong, and let's see how we can do things right. We go look at the Sony breach from 2013. What was very clear in the aftermath of that breach is that Sony did not have an incident response plan that was appropriate to the problem. Neither did, by the way, Equifax in 2018 or 2019. So, if you're the chief risk officer and you want to ask these questions, okay, so I just saw this breach that happened to XYZ company in the news. How would we do? Let's assume that we got hit with the same kind of attack. Something that's very much in the news these days is ransomware. And there's two kinds of ransomware, one where they just encrypt your data and one where they steal it first and then they encrypt it. Your response to those kind of attacks are two different responses, because one says, if you don't pay me the money, I'm going to publish all your data. That's what happened to Sony. The other kind of ransomware is, well, I'll just grind your business into the ground, you'll go bankrupt and go out of business. So those are two different problems, but as a chief risk officer, you want to say, are we prepared for this kind of risk? Show me how we're prepared. Explain to me in layman's terms, business terms, that I can understand how we're prepared to deal with this kind of risk.
Well, I really like going back for a second and framing cybersecurity as a framework and using a framework in order to, acquire and guide the use of all this information. here, particularly at IMA, our vice president of IT, he really emphasizes that cybersecurity isn't really one size fits all, right? There's not just one solution that's an upfront project and you're good. It's really an ongoing process. So my question to follow up on all of this is, when implementing a framework and cybersecurity processes and procedures, how much time and effort really goes into first kind of the needs analysis and the risk analysis to see, what are we comfortable with, and then ultimately implementing something so cybersecurity and privacy protection is all in place for the organization on an ongoing basis, taking into account this strategic foresight for the company.
Excellent question. Okay, so Cybersecurity LLC, with the word security spelled with a C, Cybersecurity LLC, that's our company. We're a full-service cybersecurity company, and we specialize in a particular area. We specialize in the building and implementing of cybersecurity and privacy programs. Okay, so any company, whether you're a solo practitioner, whether you're a small company, whether you're a large company, you must implement a cybersecurity and privacy program. Now, depending on your size and the complexity of your company, complexity defined by size, number of employees, number of offices, complexity of the company, what regulations do you have to adhere to, what industry are you operating in, have you developed your own internal software applications or not, stuff like that increases complexity. But depending on your size and your complexity, will dictate the size and complexity of the cybersecurity and privacy program which you must implement. But you get a program, you have to put in place, whether we do it for you or someone else does, you're going to put into place a program that's going to cover all these elements, and it's going to be ongoing. It's not going to be a one-time thing. Okay, let's put out a policy here. Everyone read it. Okay, let's do some phishing training this afternoon. Okay, you're done. Okay, that's the end of cybersecurity. No. Cybersecurity requires a change of thinking in the organization. For typical companies, we tell them it's going to take you 6 months to implement this, because you're not going to stop everything else you're doing. You're going to implement it a little bit at a time, every day, week after week, month after month, until it is in place and until it becomes part of what you do. When you're having a meeting about a new product you're rolling out, when you're having a meeting about a new territory that you're opening up, when you're onboarding a new person, every time you're doing anything, security is part of the conversation.
And if you are a regulated industry, you're in healthcare, you're in finance, you're in defense, you're one of the regulated industries, you are either legally or contractually required to go off and make sure that your vendors, here in Colorado, where Ray and I live, the law says that before you share data with a third party that is personally identifiable data, you must ensure that that company can protect that data. That is the law. And other states have similar laws. So, we talked about established companies, but let's move for a second to startups. Now, startups are always worried about, getting their product out the door, whatever that is. And a lot of times nowadays that's a tech product. And we've seen this, unfortunately, where we come in, late in the game, they're ready to roll it out, and they say, gee, we got to go review the security. And they've done nothing about security, and the security of the applications they've built is absolutely horrible. It's a disaster. And we've seen that recently in the news where, companies have released apps, and, well, look at the Iowa caucuses. I mean, that was a brand new application. There was very limited cybersecurity. There was very limited oversight, and it was an absolute disaster. For a small company, that could be the end of the company.
To kind of wrap things up, we talked about a lot of different aspects going into cybersecurity. As far as next steps for our listeners, what recommendations do you have as far as good resources or additional information? I know we mentioned the NIST framework your company. What else is out there, and what do you think our listeners should be doing now?
So we have a YouTube channel with some great videos on there, executive, non-technical videos. They're short. They run 5 to 10 minutes apiece, probably about a dozen videos. There's also some longer videos on specific topics. We have a blog that's available from our website. We have a lot of content there.
Our website, cybersecurity.com, security with a C. And that website, by the way, is not like your regular website, just talks about a few things. There's a lot of information on that website, a ton of good content. So you can get an education off of that. And then Mitch was getting ready to talk about his blog, which is very important source of information.
So just to reiterate what Ray said, if you go to our website, under training content, you'll see the videos. And then next to that, there's blog, and that's the blog I typically write 4 or 5 times a week on different subjects. The conversations are typically non-technical. They are privacy, security, and compliance related. They're short. Typical reads probably 5 minutes. So I recommend that. And again, it's about just creating that general conversation that you have. If you have an industry trade association that you are part of, that trade association hopefully is bringing up this conversation. I know we've been pretty active in causing some trade groups to go do that. But if they're not, the trade group can reach out to us, and we'll be happy to go do a piece that's specific to that trade group. We've done that for a number of different industries. Some of those are on our YouTube channel. So those are some things that you can do. But in generally, unfortunately, because cybersecurity and privacy risk is a changing, morphing, amorphous blob right now, this is nothing that you will go off and say, okay, I read a book, now I'm an expert. It's one of those things where you're going to learn and learn and learn, and that's really the thing that's the message here. This is an ongoing, never-ending, forever learning exercise on the part of financial professionals.
This has been Count Me In, IMA's podcast, providing you with the latest perspectives of thought leaders from the accounting and finance profession. If you like what you heard and you'd like to be counted in for more relevant accounting and finance education, visit IMA's website at www.imanet.org.